It was 3 in the morning when Silas Wentworth walked into his private suite on the 47th floor. A room only 6 people in the world have access to. And he found a woman asleep in his bed. She had a bruise on her jaw. And when she opened her eyes, she had no idea who he really was, no idea what a man like him could do, without raising his voice, without leaving a trace. But there's something she'll never know, something he did for her in the darkness, something that changed everything. And he's never going to tell her. She was sleeping in his bed. That was the first thing Silas Wentworth noticed when he stepped into his private suite at 2:47 in the morning. Not the faint smell of lavender cleaning solution, not the way the city lights pressed silver against the windows, but the woman curled beneath his sheets, her dark hair fanned across his pillow, her body small and still against the expanse of white linen. He did not move. He stood in the doorway with his coat still buttoned, his eyes adjusting to the half-dark, and he watched her breathe. She was young, mid-20s maybe. Her uniform had been folded neatly on the chair beside the nightstand, the crisp white blouse and black pencil skirt of the housekeeping staff, placed with the kind of care that suggested habit rather than thought. Her shoes sat beneath the chair, aligned perfectly. Her gold name tag caught what little light bled through the curtains. She had crawled into his bed like it was the safest place in the world. Silas did not turn on the light. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him with the kind of silence that only came from years of moving through rooms where noise meant death. The suite occupied the entire 47th floor of the Wentworth Grand Hotel. It was not listed on any booking system. It did not appear on any floor plan. The elevators required a key that fewer than 6 people in the world possessed, and the hallway leading to its door was monitored by cameras that fed directly into a system Silas controlled personally. No one entered this room without his knowledge, no one. And yet here she was. He crossed the room slowly, his footsteps soundless on the hardwood floor. She did not wake. Up close, he could see things he hadn't noticed before. The slight puffiness around her eyes, the faint bruise along her jawline, half hidden by the fall of her hair against the pillow. The way her fingers twitched in her sleep, curling and uncurling against the sheets, as though, even in dreams, she was trying to hold on to something that kept slipping away. Her name tag read Wren. Silas lowered himself into the armchair across from the bed, settling into the leather with the patience of a man who had learned that waiting was its own kind of weapon. He studied her the way he studied everything, with precision, with attention, with the kind of observation that missed nothing and revealed nothing in return. She was breathing too fast for someone truly at rest. Her pulse fluttered visibly in her throat. Even in sleep, her body had not relaxed. It remained coiled, ready, waiting for something to go wrong. He recognized that posture. He had seen it in men who had spent years in prison, in soldiers who had returned from places that did not exist on any map, in people who had learned, through repetition, that safety was a lie and stillness was the only armor they had left. He waited. Her eyes opened 17 minutes later. For a moment she simply stared at the ceiling, disoriented, caught between sleep and waking. Then her gaze shifted, traveling across the unfamiliar room, and landed on the man sitting motionless in the chair beside the window. She sat up so fast the sheets tangled around her legs. Oh God, oh my God, I didn't mean to fall asleep. I just needed to lie down for a minute. I swear I was going to leave before. Breathe. The word was quiet, not a command, an offering. Wren's chest heaved. Her eyes were wide, darting between him and the door, calculating distances, measuring threats. But she didn't run. She sat frozen in his bed, her hair wild around her face, her hands gripping the sheets like they were the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. I know who you are, she whispered. I know this is your room. I know I'm not supposed to be here. And yet here you are. I'll go, right now. I'll pack up my things and I'll go and you'll never see me again, please. I need this job. I can't. Her voice cracked. Silas remained still. How did you get in? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She had been bracing for anger, for threats, for the kind of cold dismissal that powerful men dealt out like loose change. A simple question, asked without heat, without judgment, was not what she had expected. The service corridor. she said. "Behind the east stairwell. There's a panel that's supposed to be sealed, but the lock's been broken for months. It leads to the maintenance access behind the kitchenette." She swallowed. "I found it by accident. A few weeks ago. I wasn't trying to. I just needed somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one would look." Silas filed away the information about the service corridor. Someone would answer for that oversight tomorrow, but his expression remained unchanged. "Are you all right?" The question hung in the air between them. Ren blinked. "What?" "You've been crying for several hours by the look of it, the bruise on your jaw is fresh within the last few hours. You didn't have it when you started your shift tonight." He paused. "So I'm asking, are you all right?" She stared at him like he had spoken in a language she didn't recognize. "You noticed me before tonight?" "I notice everyone who works in my hotel." It was the truth. Silas made it his business to know the faces of every employee, from the executive managers to the night cleaning crew. Knowledge was control, control was power, and power, in his world, was the only thing that kept you alive. But he did not tell her that. He simply watched as her hand rose, almost involuntarily, to touch the bruise she had tried so hard to hide. "I'm fine," she said. "That's not what I asked. I just—" She exhaled, a shaky sound. "It's been a long night. I can see that." He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Do you need help?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread across her face. Confusion, suspicion, something that might have been hope before she locked it away. "Help with what?" "With whatever put that bruise on your face. With whatever made you climb 47 floors through a service corridor to sleep in a stranger's bed because you had nowhere else to go." Ren's jaw tightened. "It's nothing. It's not nothing. I fell in the stairwell. I was tired and I wasn't paying attention and—" Ren. Her name, spoken quietly, stopped her mid-lie. She looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time since she had opened her eyes, and something in her expression shifted. Not trust, not hope, something smaller and more fragile, like the first hairline crack in a wall that had been holding back water for years. "You don't have to tell me," Silas said. "But you don't have to lie either, not here." She was silent for a long moment. Then she looked down at her hands, still tangled in his sheets. "I should go home." The word, home, came out of her mouth like a stone. She was forcing herself to swallow. Silas watched her gather herself, untangling from the sheets, reaching for her uniform, her movements quick and practiced. She had done this before, many times, pulling herself together in the aftermath of something she would never name. "Are you married?" Ren's hand stilled on the buttons of her blouse. She didn't turn around. She stood there with her back to him, her spine rigid, her fingers frozen in place. "Yes." The word was barely audible. "Does your husband know where you are?" A long pause. "No." Her voice was steadier now, more controlled. "He went out. After. He always goes out after. I have a few hours before he comes back. After." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with everything she wasn't saying. Silas let the silence stretch. "And if you're not there when he returns?" Ren's laugh was short and bitter, and utterly without humor. "Then I'd better have a really good story." She finished buttoning her blouse, smoothing the fabric with hands that only trembled slightly. When she finally turned to face him, her expression had closed off completely. That flat survival mask, sliding back into place like armor she had worn so long, it had become a second skin. "Thank you," she said, "for not calling security, for not— I don't know, I've violated your privacy. I get it if you need to fire me." "I'm not going to fire you." She blinked. "I'm sorry. You needed somewhere safe." Silas rose from the chair, but didn't move toward her, keeping the same measured distance between them. "You found one. That's not a crime." Ren stared at him for a long moment, her brow furrowed like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't make sense. People did not speak to her this way. People did not offer her grace without expecting something in return. "I don't understand," she said softly. "You don't have to." He crossed to the small bar near the window and poured a glass of water from the crystal carafe. He set it on the nightstand beside the bed. close enough for her to reach, far enough that she wouldn't feel cornered. Drink something before you go. You've been crying for hours. You're dehydrated. Ren's hand trembled as she reached for the glass. She drank, and Silas watched her throat move as she swallowed, watched the way her eyes closed for just a moment as the cool water hit her system, and he filed away another piece of the puzzle that was this woman who had somehow found her way into his bed. 3 days passed before Silas saw her again. He spent those days the way he spent most days, in meetings that never appeared on any calendar, in conversations conducted in half-finished sentences and meaningful silence, in the slow and careful management of an empire that had been built by his father and his father's father before him. The Wentworth family had controlled the eastern seaboard's luxury hospitality industry for 3 generations. On paper, they were investors, developers, philanthropists. Their name graced hospital wings and university scholarships. They attended charity galas and shook hands with senators. Beneath the surface, they were something else entirely. Silas had inherited the family's legitimate businesses when he was 26, after his father's heart attack. He had inherited the illegitimate ones 2 years later, after his father's second heart attack, the one that had been helped along by a business partner who had made the mistake of thinking Silas was soft. That partner was no longer in business. Silas did not think of himself as a good man. He did not think of himself as a bad one either. He thought of himself as a man who understood the way the world actually worked. The levers of power, the currencies of fear and obligation, the invisible systems that determined who rose and who fell. He had spent his entire adult life learning to manipulate those systems, and now, for reasons he did not fully understand, he found himself thinking about a woman who had slept in his bed. He pulled her personnel file on the second day. Ren Calloway, 24 years old, hired 18 months ago as a junior housekeeper, promoted to senior staff within 8 months. An unusually fast advancement. Performance reviews were uniformly excellent, attentive to detail, professional demeanor, never complains, never calls in sick. Her emergency contact was listed as Garrett Calloway, husband, same address in a modest apartment complex in Queens. Silas requested a background check on Garrett Calloway. The results came back within 6 hours. Garrett Calloway was 31 years old. He worked as a senior sales representative for a pharmaceutical distribution company, a legitimate one, as far as Silas's people could tell. He had a bachelor's degree in business from a mid-tier state school. He drove a late-model BMW that was leased, not owned. He had a gym membership he used 4 times a week. He had a credit card balance that hovered near the limit and a savings account that rarely exceeded $3,000. On paper, he was aggressively ordinary. But paper only told part of the story. There were no police reports filed against him, no restraining orders, no documented history of violence. There were, however, 3 women who had dated him before Ren, women whose names appeared in the corners of old social media posts, in the backgrounds of photos that had since been deleted. Silas's people tracked them down, one by one. 2 refused to speak. The third, a woman named Emmeline, who had moved to Oregon and changed her last name, agreed to a phone call, but only after being assured that Garrett would never know. She talked for 45 minutes. When the call ended, Silas sat alone in his office for a long time, staring at the city lights through his window, his hands folded in his lap, his expression utterly still. He found Ren again on the 3rd night. Not in his suite this time. She was too smart to return to the same hiding place twice. Instead, she was in the basement service corridor, sitting on an overturned supply crate in a corner where the security cameras couldn't reach, her knees drawn up, her face buried in her arms. She wasn't crying. She was simply sitting there, breathing, existing in the only space where no one could see her. Silas watched her from the shadows for a long moment before he stepped into the light. "You found the blind spot." Ren's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide, then wary, then, after a long assessing pause, simply tired. "There are blind spots everywhere if you look hard enough." She pushed a strand of hair out of her face. "Most people just don't bother to look." Silas inclined his head, acknowledging the truth of it. "Mind if I sit?" She stared at him. No one asked her permission for anything. The question itself seemed to confuse her like a word in a language she had once spoken but had since forgotten. "It's your hotel." "That's not what I asked." Another long pause. "Yeah, sure. Sit." He lowered himself onto a crate across from her, leaving several feet of space between them. The corridor was cold and smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. A fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting their faces in alternating shadow and sickly yellow light. "You haven't slept," he observed. "Neither have you." "Fair enough." He leaned back against the concrete wall. "Insomnia. Had it since I was a kid." "What do you do when you can't sleep?" "Walk the building, check on things, make sure everything's where it's supposed to be." "And is it, tonight?" Silas considered the question. "No," he said. "Something's off." Ren's hands tightened on her knees. "Look, if this is about the other night, it's not. Because I meant what I said. I won't go back up there. I won't." "Ren." His voice was quiet but firm. "This isn't about the room, this is about you." She went still. "What about me?" "I want to know if you're okay, and I mean actually okay, not the version you tell everyone so they'll stop asking." The silence stretched between them. "Why do you care?" It was a genuine question, not hostile, not suspicious, just confused. Like she genuinely couldn't understand why a man like him would waste his time on a woman like her. "I'm not sure," Silas admitted. "Maybe I'm just tired of pretending I don't see things." Ren studied him for a long moment. Her jaw was tight, her eyes guarded, but somewhere beneath all that armor, something flickered. "I'm married," she said finally. "I know." "My husband." She stopped, started again. "He's not a bad person." Silas said nothing. "I know that sounds crazy, after the other night, but he's not. He's just... He has a temper. Things get out of hand sometimes. But it's not his fault. Not really. He's under a lot of pressure at work. And I know I don't always make things easier, and sometimes I say things that make him hit you." The words hung in the air. Ren flinched like he'd slapped her. "He doesn't... It's not like that. It's not abuse or whatever. He just loses control sometimes." "What's the difference?" "The difference is that he loves me." Her voice cracked. "He loves me and he's sorry every time and he swears it won't happen again, and I believe him. I have to believe him." Silas let her words settle. "Why?" "Because if I don't..." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "If I don't believe him, then what does that make me? Some stupid girl who married a monster, some pathetic victim who can't leave? That's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. So instead, you tell yourself it's your fault." Ren lowered her hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but no tears fell. "Isn't it easier that way?" "Easier for who?" She didn't answer. They sat in silence for a while. The fluorescent light continued its arrhythmic flicker. Somewhere in the distance, a service elevator hummed to life and then fell still. The hotel breathed around them, all 47 floors of it, all the guests and staff and secrets it contained, all the lives unfolding behind closed doors. "My mother used to stay too," Ren said suddenly. Her voice was quieter now. Softer, like she was speaking to herself as much as to him. "With my dad, he had the same kind of temper. She'd clean up the mess, put on makeup, tell everyone she was clumsy. I used to hate her for it." Silas didn't speak. "I swore I'd be different. I was so sure I'd never end up like her." A bitter smile crossed her face. "Funny how that works out. You're not your mother." "No." Ren looked at him. "Then why am I sitting in a basement at 2 in the morning instead of going home?" "Because some part of you knows the truth." "And what truth is that?" Silas held her gaze. "That love isn't supposed to leave bruises." Her face crumpled. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It wasn't always like this. When we first met, he was everything. Kind and funny and thoughtful. He made me feel special. He made me feel like I mattered. And then slowly, so slowly, I didn't even notice, it started to change. Little comments at first, little criticisms, and I thought he was right. I thought he was helping me be better." She paused. By the time it turned into this, I didn't know how to leave. I didn't know who I was without him. I still don't. That's by design. Ren frowned. What do you mean? People like your husband, they don't start with violence, they start with love. They make you need them before they show you what they really are. And by the time you see it, you're so tangled up in them that leaving feels impossible. You sound like you've dealt with this before. I've dealt with a lot of things. She was quiet for a moment. He proposed to me on a stairwell, she said. New Year's Eve, his friend's rooftop party. The elevator was broken, so we had to walk up 12 flights. We were laughing so hard we could barely breathe. And when we got to the landing on the 11th floor, he just stopped, got down on one knee right there. The fireworks started going off outside, and he looked up at me and said I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Her voice broke. I said yes before he finished asking. I was so happy. I thought I was the luckiest person alive. And now? Ren closed her eyes. Now I don't know what to think. Silas stood. The employee break room on the 12th floor, he said. It's supposed to be locked between midnight and 6, but the lock's been broken for a few weeks. Security cameras rotate every 20 minutes. There's a gap between 1:15 and 1:20. Room's got a couch, not the most comfortable, but it's quiet. Ren looked up at him, confusion flickering across her face. Why are you telling me this? Silas considered the question. Because everyone deserves a place where they can breathe, he said, even if it's only for a few minutes. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing softly down the empty corridor. Behind him, Ren remained on her crate, watching him go, her expression caught somewhere between confusion and something that might, in another life, have been the beginning of hope. Over the following weeks, Silas Wentworth set about dismantling Garrett Calloway. He did not do it quickly. Quickness would have been satisfying, but it would not have been effective. Quick destruction was visible. It left fingerprints. It created martyrs and victims, narrative valves that could be spun and reframed. Silas preferred the slow approach. He preferred to remove the ground from beneath a man's feet 1 inch at a time, so gradually that the man didn't realize he was sinking until the water was already over his head. The first piece was financial. Garrett's job at the pharmaceutical distribution company was decent. Not great, but decent. It paid well enough to maintain the BMW and the expensive gym membership, and the carefully curated image of success that Garrett wore like a second skin. But the job depended on relationships. Garrett sold to hospitals, clinics, independent practices. He worked on commission. His income fluctuated based on how many contracts he could close each quarter, and those contracts depended entirely on his ability to charm the right people at the right time. It was remarkable, Silas thought, how easily a charming man would become an uncomfortable one. A word here, a rumor there, a suggestion dropped casually into the right conversation that Garrett Calloway might not be entirely trustworthy, that his numbers didn't quite add up, that someone had heard some things about how he treated his wife. Nothing specific, nothing actionable, just enough to make people hesitate. Within a month, Garrett's closing rate had dropped by 30%. Within 2 months, his manager had called him in for a performance review that was really a warning. Garrett came home from that meeting and put his fist through the bathroom door. Ren told her coworker she had tripped on a rug. The second piece was social. Garrett had cultivated a careful image over the years. The successful salesman, the devoted husband, the guy who always picked up the check and remembered everyone's birthday. He had friends from college, friends from work, friends from the gym. He was the kind of man other men wanted to grab a beer with, the kind of man women found charming and safe. Silas understood, perhaps better than anyone, how much work went into maintaining that kind of image, and he understood how fragile it was. The rumors began small. Someone mentioned to someone else that Garrett had gotten a little too aggressive with a bartender at happy hour. Someone else mentioned that his wife always seemed nervous when he was around. Had anyone noticed that? A third person recalled an incident at a party, something they hadn't thought much of at the time, but now that they were thinking about it, none of it was concrete. All of it was damning. Garrett's friends began to pull back, not overtly. They still answered his texts, still showed up occasionally, but the invitations came less frequently. The conversations grew shorter. The warmth that had always surrounded him began to cool, degree by imperceptible degree. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He came home from a canceled golf outing and accused Wren of spreading lies about him. She swore she hadn't. She swore she hadn't told anyone anything. He didn't believe her. The bruise she wore to work the next day was on her ribs, where no one could see. The third piece was the most delicate. Silas had learned, through his network of informants and investigators, that Garrett's company was under federal scrutiny for pricing. Irregularities. It was minor. The kind of thing that happened in the pharmaceutical industry all the time. The kind of thing that usually resulted in a fine and a promise to do better. But federal investigations could be expanded. They could be redirected. They could be focused, with the right pressure in the right places, on specific individuals who might have cut corners or looked the other way. Silas made some calls. He spoke to people who owed him favors, people in agencies and offices, people who understood that information was currency and cooperation was survival. He did not ask for anything illegal. He simply suggested that Garrett Calloway's expense reports deserved a closer look, that his travel records might reveal some inconsistencies, that his relationships with certain clients might be worth examining. The investigation began quietly. Garrett didn't know yet, but he would. Through all of this, Silas continued to encounter Wren, not intentionally, or at least not explicitly. But the hotel was his domain, and he moved through it constantly, and she was always there, folding towels or restocking supply closets or moving through the halls with her head down and her shoulders tight. She looked tired. She always looked tired now. But there were moments, brief, fragile moments, when something else broke through. When she would pause in her work and stare out a window at the city, her expression softening into something that looked almost like longing. When she would laugh at something a coworker said, a real laugh, genuine and bright, and then catch herself and let the mask slide back into place. Silas watched these moments from a distance. He said nothing. He asked nothing. He simply made sure that the break room on the 12th floor remained accessible. That the schedule allowed Wren to take her breaks without interruption. That no one asked too many questions about the nights when she clocked out late and clocked in early. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough, but it was what he could offer without pushing her further into the arms of the man who was hurting her. One night, he found her on the service stairwell between the 8th and 9th floors. She was sitting on the steps with her back against the wall, her phone in her hands, tears streaming silently down her face. Silas hesitated. He had learned over the years that there were moments when presence was a gift and moments when it was an intrusion. He had learned to read the difference in the set of someone's shoulders, the angle of their head, the quality of their silence. Wren's silence was the kind that wanted to be alone. He turned to go. Do you ever think about who you'd be if things had gone differently? Her voice stopped him. He turned back. Wren was still staring at her phone, but her tears had slowed. Her voice was distant, like she was speaking to herself as much as to him. I used to have all these plans. Before Garrett, I was going to travel, see the world. I had this list of places I wanted to go. Tokyo, Paris, Barcelona. I was saving money from every paycheck. I had a jar in my closet with little slips of paper, each one with a city written on it. I was going to pull one out at random and just go. She paused. Garrett found the jar a few months after we got married. He thought it was stupid, said we had responsibilities now, adult things to worry about. He threw the jar away. Silas lowered himself onto the step below her, keeping a careful distance. What happened to the money? Joint account. Wren smiled, but there was no humor in it. For emergencies, he said. We needed to be practical. And you agreed. I wanted to make him happy. I wanted to be a good wife. She shook her head. That's all I ever wanted. To be good enough. You were always good enough. She looked at him sharply. You don't know that. I know that no amount of perfection would have changed who he is. I know that the goalposts moved every time you thought you'd figured out the rules. I know that nothing you could have done differently would have made him treat you with the respect you deserve. Wren's face crumpled. Then why does it feel like my fault? Because he taught you to believe it was. Because that's how control works. It rewrites reality until you can't remember what was true before. She was quiet for a long moment. I keep thinking about leaving, she whispered. Every night when I can't sleep. I lie there, And I imagined packing a bag, walking out the door, never looking back. But every time I try to actually do it, I freeze. It's like there's a wall in my head, like something pulls me back. That's normal. She looked at him sharply. Normal? Leaving someone like Garrett is one of the hardest things a person can do. The psychological bonds are complicated. The fear is real. The practical obstacles are overwhelming. It doesn't make you weak that you haven't left. It makes you human. My mother never left. She stayed until my father died. Heart attack when I was 22. Ren's voice was flat. After the funeral, she told me she'd been planning to leave him for years, but she kept waiting for the right moment, and it never came. She looked down at her phone. I don't want to wake up 20 years from now and realize I spent my whole life waiting. Then don't. It's not that simple. No, Silas agreed. It's not. But it is possible. Not today, maybe, not tomorrow, but eventually, when you're ready. What if I'm never ready? Silas considered the question. Then you find other ways to survive. You carve out moments of peace wherever you can. You protect the parts of yourself he can't touch. And maybe, one day, something shifts. Something inside you or outside you, and the door that seemed impossible to open is suddenly right there. Ren looked at him. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's also not as complicated as he wants you to believe. He paused. The hardest part isn't leaving. The hardest part is giving yourself permission to want something different. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. And when you get that permission, you walk through the door, Silas said quietly, and you don't look back. The moment came in March. It arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper. A phone call Garrett received on a Tuesday morning, informing him that the federal investigation into his company had been expanded to include his personal financial records. He was not under arrest. He was not being charged. But his name was now part of an official inquiry, and in Garrett's world, where image was everything, that was almost worse. Silas watched the unraveling from a distance. Garrett's colleagues began to distance themselves. His clients stopped returning calls. His manager put him on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the investigation. A polite way of saying he was no longer welcome in the office. The BMW was repossessed in early April. The gym membership lapsed. The carefully constructed image of success that Garrett had spent a decade building began to collapse under the weight of suspicion and rumor and fear. Ren noticed the changes. How could she not? Garrett came home earlier now. He drank more. He paced the apartment like a caged animal, ranting about conspiracies and betrayals, about enemies trying to destroy him, about a world that had turned against him for no reason. His anger, always simmering, began to boil over in new ways. He accused Ren of working with his enemies, of spying on him, of planning to leave just when he needed her most. She denied everything. She tried to soothe him, to calm him, to be the perfect wife he demanded. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in late April. Ren arrived at work with a split lip and a story about walking into a cabinet door. Silas saw her in the lobby. Their eyes met for just a moment, long enough for him to see the fear there, the exhaustion, the silent plea for something she could not name. He said nothing. He walked past her without a word. But that night, he made a phone call. The call was to a woman named Theodora, who ran a nonprofit organization that provided emergency services for domestic violence survivors. The organization was funded in part by an anonymous donor who had been giving substantial sums for over 5 years. Silas told Theodora that a woman might be calling soon, that her name was Ren, that she was not yet ready to leave, but she might be close, that when she was ready, she would need help, immediate help, without questions, without judgment, without bureaucracy. Theodora said she understood. She said she would be waiting. Ren called the hotline on a Friday night in May. She did not know that her name had been given in advance. She did not know that the woman who answered had been briefed on her situation. She only knew that she had dialed the number on a card she'd found tucked into the cushion of the break room couch, a card that hadn't been there yesterday. The woman on the phone was kind. She didn't ask why Ren had waited so long. She didn't ask what had finally pushed her to call. She simply asked what Ren needed. And when Ren said, "I don't know, I just can't do this anymore," the woman said, "That's enough. That's all you need to know right now. We'll figure out the rest together." The shelter was in a quiet neighborhood outside the city. It looked like an ordinary house, a little worn, a little cramped, but clean and warm and full of the smell of something cooking in the kitchen. Ren arrived with a single bag and the clothes on her back. She slept for 14 hours the first night. When she woke up, she found a cup of tea on the nightstand and a note that said, "Take your time. There's no rush here." She didn't return to the hotel. She called her supervisor and resigned, apologizing for the short notice, offering to forfeit her final paycheck. The supervisor, a woman named Margaret, who had worked at the Wentworth Grand for 20 years, told her not to be ridiculous. She told Ren that her final check would be mailed to whatever address she provided. She told her that if she ever needed a reference, she had one. Ren cried when she hung up the phone. She was doing a lot of crying lately. But the tears felt different now. They felt like something washing away. The divorce proceedings began in June. Garrett contested everything. Every piece of furniture, every bank account, every detail of the life they had built together. But Garrett was also drowning. The federal investigation had expanded again. His former employer had quietly settled with the government, but Garrett's personal liability remained unresolved. His lawyers were expensive. His options were limited. His rage, which had always been turned inward toward Ren, was now turned outward, toward a world that refused to give him what he believed he deserved. He hired a cheap attorney who filed objection after objection. Ren's attorney, provided pro bono through the shelter's legal aid program, was patient, methodical, thorough. By September, it was over. Ren walked out of the courthouse with nothing but her freedom and a piece of paper that said she was no longer bound to the man who had hurt her. It was the only piece of paper that had ever mattered. Ren moved to a small town in upstate New York. She found a job at a bed and breakfast. A tiny place, nothing like the Wentworth Grand, but clean and quiet, and hers. She learned to bake bread from the owner, an elderly woman named Astrid, who asked no questions and offered endless cups of coffee. She got a library card. She adopted a cat, a gray tabby she named Phantom, because of the way he appeared silently at her feet whenever she was sad. She started writing in a journal, just a few lines at first, then pages, then notebooks full of thoughts she had never allowed herself to think. Feelings she had never allowed herself to feel. She was learning slowly how to be a person again. One evening in late October, she received a letter. There was no return address, no signature, just a single sheet of paper with a few words typed in plain black ink. The break room on the 12th floor has been officially closed for renovation. The couch has been moved to the employee lounge on the 3rd floor. The coffee machine there is new. Someone said it makes excellent espresso. Ren stared at the letter for a long time. She thought about the man who had found her sleeping in his bed, who had told her about blind spots and broken locks and rooms where she could breathe, who had spoken to her like she was a person when she had forgotten that she was one. She thought about all the small things that had seemed to shift around her in those final months. Schedule changes that gave her time to rest, the card tucked into the couch cushion, the way certain problems seemed to resolve themselves without explanation. She had never asked him for help, he had never offered, but somehow, in the spaces between words, something had passed between them. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her journal. Then she put on her coat and went for a walk in the autumn air. Silas Wentworth stood at the window of his office on the 47th floor, watching the city lights flicker below. It was late, past midnight. The hotel was quiet, the halls empty, the world outside reduced to a constellation of windows and headlights, and the distant hum of a city that never truly slept. On his desk there was a report. It detailed the final resolution of Garrett Calloway's legal troubles, a plea agreement, a fine, a suspended sentence that would keep him out of prison but destroy any chance he had of rebuilding his career. The report noted that Garrett had moved to Florida, that he was working as a used car salesman, that his credit score was in ruins, and his social circle had evaporated, and he was, by all accounts, a man who had lost everything except the person responsible for his own destruction. Silas did not feel satisfaction. He did not feel triumph. He felt only a quiet sense of completion, the same feeling he had when a complicated equation finally resolved, when the last piece of a puzzle slid into place. He thought about Ren sometimes, not often, not obsessively, just occasionally, in the quiet hours of the night, when the weight of his empire pressed heavy on his shoulders and he found himself wondering what it would be like to live a different kind of life. He had received word, through channels that didn't officially exist, that she was doing well, that she had found work, found stability, found something like peace. That was enough. That was more than enough. He had not helped her for gratitude or recognition. He had helped her because she had needed help, and he had been in a position to provide it. And sometimes, that was the only reason required. He turned from the window and crossed to his desk. There was work to be done. There was always work to be done. But before he sat down, he paused for a moment, his hand resting on the back of his chair, his eyes distant with thought. Everyone deserves a place where they can breathe. He had said that to her once in a cold basement corridor, when neither of them knew what would come next. He still believed it. Perhaps more than anything else he believed. He sat down, opened his laptop, and began to work. Outside, the city glittered on, and somewhere, in a small town hundreds of miles away, a woman with a gray cat and a library card and a journal full of secrets looked out her window at the same stars and breathed.